Welcome to Your Strata Property, the podcast for property owners looking for reliable, accurate, and bite-sized information from an experienced and authoritative source. To access previous episodes and useful strata tips, go to www.yourstrataproperty.com.au.
Hello and welcome. I'm Amanda Farmer and I have with me today Reena van Aalst from Strata Central. Hi, Reena.
Hi, Amanda. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It is another busy day for each of us, I know, and we're on a tight schedule here, so I'm just going to jump straight in. Is that okay?
Sounds good to me.
I want to know what your challenge has been this week.
An interesting challenge, Amanda. We had an owner that had submitted a bylaw for a renovation, and the committee had gone through the bylaw and everyone was happy with the contents and all the indemnities that were contained in that bylaw. But then just before the agenda had to be issued, the owner said, I've just got some new plans and they've just been updated and I'm going to send in the revised plans. We thought, okay, with the bylaw. So, I suppose all said, that's fine. I think there was some little detail that had to be added to the plans that the committee had requested in the first instance when they were submitted with the original draft bylaw. And then just before we were about to issue the agenda, we went through the bylaw and we noticed that there were actually some extra additions that weren't actually in the original bylaw. And unfortunately, we had to go back to the owner and say, this is not what the committee had approved. And because I only sent it in the morning, the agenda was being issued after us sort of saying, where are the final plans? It was a bit touch and go whether or not we could actually include it because of the fact that the committee had actually not approved that version. There were some slight changes. There were annexures that were referred to that weren't in the original bylaw. So, it was just a bit of a challenge, man. I'm not sure if any of our strata managers out there have had this problem occur where, the committee has considered a bylaw that's been put to them. Not that they can approve the bylaw, but it's always good to have the committee's thoughts and opinions so that when it's presented to all owners, the committee can say, yeah, we've had this vetted. I suppose another thing we could have done on that, Amanda, but I suppose we didn't do was because of the fact that the owner had a strata lawyer draft the bylaw. And sometimes if owners go to their own lawyer and their own lawyers aren't very experienced in strata law, you get sometimes bylaws that really don't make sense. And I've had quite a few of those. And unfortunately, some owners don't really want you to give them any feedback. And then when it gets knocked back at the meeting, which has happened just about a month ago, actually, in one of our schemes, they had to go back and get some major modifications done to that bylaw to make it actually reasonable for owners to consider.
Yeah, I'm really glad you're raising this example, Reena, because it does come up regularly. I do a lot of bylaw drafting on behalf of lot owners, and they say to me, once we have prepared the bylaw, they say, okay, what's the next step? And I always recommend that the bylaw is sent to the strata committee first up, generally care of the strata manager, and that we say to the strata committee, this is a bylaw for proposed renovation works at lot 6, for example. We're sending this to you as a draft so that we can get your input, committee, your feedback, and you can let us know if you require any additions or amendments in order to be able to support this bylaw at the general meeting. So as you point out correctly, Reena, the committee can't approve the bylaw. That's not why we're sending them the draft. We're sending them the draft so that we can be sure that they are happy with it. We've met all of their requirements and we can then have their support for the bylaw at the general meeting, and it has its best chance of success because owners out there will know when you go to meetings, generally the chair or maybe the other committee members as well often are in quite a powerful position influencing the decisions of other owners in the room. So if you can get them to say, yes, we've seen this bylaw, we've discussed it with the strata lawyer who was engaged by the lot owner and we're happy with it, then your bylaw is pretty much guaranteed to go through. So I understand a situation where the committee may have said, we're happy with this particular version, with these particular plans. It can be quite difficult when on the day of sending out the agenda, you're confronted with a different version with different plans. And I suppose on one view, if the motion was properly put to you as the strata manager with delegated powers of the secretary, you had the explanatory note, you could have put it on the agenda as it was given to you by the lot owner.
Yeah, we did, Amanda, because at the end of the day, it's not for us or the committee to say that you can't put on the agenda. It's just more the fact that we were trying to help the owner
Yes.
have it passed. And therefore, we don't want any sort of situation of embarrassment perhaps, or because many times the owners will actually look to us and say, but why didn't you tell me this bylaw wasn't the right wording? Why didn't you tell me that I should have done this? And why didn't you tell me I should have done that?
Yep.
And I totally accept that in an advisory capacity, that is our role, to help owners understand, what special privileges bylaws should contain, what the Act says in relation to the terms and conditions of such a bylaw. And so sometimes, there's a bit of a fine line when, someone has had the committee consider a actual bylaw and then the owner then changing it. So no, definitely, Amanda, we just submitted it as it was. We're just trying to make sure that if the owner knew that it was actually different, the plans weren't what had been asked for, and therefore there was a chance at the meeting that there could be some issues in relation to trying to have it passed.
Yeah, and definitely a good idea to bring that to their attention. I think what it comes down to is owners being aware of how long this process often takes. So people purchasing a strata property and thinking, I'll just renovate it, I'll do a new bathroom, a new kitchen, and I won't put a tenant in until that work is done, thinking that that's all going to take 2 weeks. Not only do we have to have the bylaw prepared, put to a general meeting, which has notice periods that need to be complied with, but we would also like to put it to the Strata Committee before the meeting is even called to make sure that it's in line with their requirements. So it can be kind of a few months, really.
Yeah, and they have to also, the Secretary can call a general meeting, Amanda, or the committee has to call it. So, so even that process requires the committee's input as well.
Yep. For sure. Always good to recap on those, what can seem to be basics for players like us, for strata managers, for strata lawyers, but good to recap on the process and why we do the things we do the way we do them.
Exactly.
All right, my challenge for this week, this has been on my list here, Reena, for a little while, and we're finally getting to it, which is exciting. This was a question asked by a member inside the Your Strata Property online membership community, and it is about financial statements and the reporting period. We have discussed this a couple of times in the past on the podcast, particularly because under our 2015 legislation in New South Wales, we no longer have to have a fixed time at which we have our annual general meetings. We can now have an annual general meeting at any time within the building's financial year. And the question that was asked by this member inside our online forum was, if a building is holding its annual general meeting at different periods. So, for example, they might have held it last year in August because the end of their financial year was the end of June, for example, and all the accounts were ready for August.
Yeah.
And then for whatever reason, change of strata manager, a committee that took their eye off the ball, they didn't have another general meeting for 18 months. Isn't it the case that their financial statements, their accounting records, if you like, are going to display different reporting periods? And I understand that the formal financial statement, as it is audited, will always reflect the period of the financial year. And you may have supplementary accounts prepared to cover off the interim period. And I think we've chatted about that before. But this very good question raised by a member was, well, what happens then with budgeting? And if you're trying to compare your previous budget to your current and your forecast, isn't it the case that we're going to be comparing different periods of expenditure? And how do we navigate that one?
Well, if we use your example, Amanda, of say a 30 June year end, and in last year's case, you would have had the AGM in August, so therefore you probably may not have had any supplementary accounts issued. So your budget would be for the period 1 July to 30 June, say, of this year. Now, let's say you held the AGM in January, for argument's sake, or whatever time, could be 6 months later, 5 months later. Your budget still starts from 1 July. It's just that the actuals, you've basically gone further into that financial year than you would have liked, and therefore, in a sense, the budget should be far more accurate because you've in 5 months you've already spent this much, so you can probably
so you're kind of budgeting retrospectively there,
in a way, because you sort of have gone towards the halfway mark of your budget. So the budget doesn't change. You have obviously further supplementary accounting period because now, if we're in October, for example, and then we've had 4 months of financials. So in a sense, I think people perhaps are confusing the supplementary periods not matching, but the reporting period will always be the same, but it's the additional supplementary accounts that will be different. But the budget is still the same for the financial period, financial year end. There's no difference. That still stays the same.
And that in turn means that where your AGM is delayed for whatever reason, the owner's corporation is actually incurring expenses, spending money, if you like, on items that haven't been budgeted.
Strictly speaking, yeah. But I think the other thing that's having more an issue, Amanda, is the levies. Now, some managers don't allow for levies to be struck beyond the financial year end. So let's say you had a 30 June year end in this example. Your last levy was issued in April, the April quarter levy, April, May, June. But then after that, you've got no levies being issued because they haven't put in motion that they continue at a certain rate. And so what happens is, it actually affects the cash flow because you have no money coming in, which is a real issue. And let's say you decide to increase the levies, then you've pretty much got to bear any increases in a shorter period of time because you've already had, say, 1 quarter or even usually 1 quarter that normally would have elapsed. But in one case, I had like 3 quarters have already elapsed, before we took over and no levies were struck and there was no continuing motion to allow levies to be redetermined until the next AGM. So there's also the income side of it too, which sometimes is a problem. Or even if you did have a recurring levy that allowed you to continue in the new financial year at a certain rate, sometimes that rate is low or was based on a different budgetary allocation or expenses. And then the increase, I've had this happen in quite a few buildings too, the increases have then been borne in 6 months. Let's say, you've had to sort of increase your levies substantially or even by 20 or 30%, then the remaining 2 quarters then have that increase in levies built into them. So people think, someone asked me last time, are we still paying a special levy? It's like, no, it's not a special levy. It's just your normal levy at the higher rate. And therefore, once you adopt a new budget and you need far more money than you had in your previous financial year, then that increase has to be borne in 6 months rather than, say, 9 months, which would have been the case had the AGM been held in a timely manner. But as we all know, Amanda, as practicing managers and in yourselves being a lawyer as well, we're practicing in this area, sometimes there are many reasons why the AGM can't be held on time. So, and now that sort of time restriction is no longer there apart from having it once in a financial year. Still, you can still push it out to the end of the next financial year if you really wanted to.
Well, that's right. And I'm not sure, I agree that managers are busy and it's often hard to pin down a date in a diary, but I'm not sure that should ever extend past 6 months, which is the example that this particular member was giving me, because of these issues with expenses being incurred that are not budgeted and then having to catch up on levies. It just causes a problem. And I wonder if our New South Wales legislature thought about that when they changed the rules. Yeah,
well, I think the other issue, Amanda, to consider is that it's really up to the committee to decide when the AGM is held, not the strata manager.
True.
Although I do know many managers operate where they say they just issue the AGM agenda. They don't get any input from the strata committee about the budget, and that's that. So, and they have like a running schedule of AGMs one after the other. But unfortunately, I think that's not really the best. I mean, it may work for many people, and everyone's got their own business model, but I believe that depending on your delegated authority, it's always best to get the committee's input into the budget and, of course, make sure that the dates, is set by the committee. Obviously, there's got to be availability on both sides to hold the meeting.
Yep. Absolutely. And again, giving yourself enough time to be having that conversation. I know in our building, we've been talking about it. Ours is due in about 3 months. And so we've started talking about it now. That's really
it's great.
What you need to do. Yep. Okay, let's jump into your win for this week, Reena.
I've got a potential scheme that wants to change over to our company. And I met with them 2 weeks ago. And they said to me that their agency agreement expires, I think, in about 5 days' time from today. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, did you get a notice from your Strata managing agent that the contract is expiring? And they said, no. They said, we just know the date because obviously, we're looking to change, and that's why they looked at it. So I advised them that in the new Act, there is an obligation under Section 56 of the Strata Schemes Management Act, where it says that the Strata managing agent must give the Owners Corporation written notice of the end of a term of appointment at least 3 months before the end of the term of appointment and at least 1 month before the end of each extension of a term permitted by this section. And so basically the term that's basically permitted by the section is that the term of the appointment of a strata managing agent may be extended by the strata committee for successive periods of up to 3 months after it would otherwise expire, but not for any period that would extend beyond the date of the next AGM, pending a decision as to the reappointment of the strata managing agent. So basically I said, well, that doesn't sound right. So they should have told you that it's going to expire in 5 days from now. But at the time it was just a bit over 3 weeks. And I said to me, well, what are we going to do? So I gave them the motions to allow the extension of up to 3 months or the next AGM, whichever is sooner, for them to be able to let their agent know, because they obviously want to make a decision to change, but they haven't really had the understanding or the experience to know that you've got to hold another general meeting to appoint a strata managing agent. And so they've only started this process about a month ago and, getting tenders and meeting different management personnel. So, and they were so happy that I gave them this advice, because they were just concerned what would happen. Because I said to them, with the new legislation, your agency agreement for a managing agent stops on that day. So there's no extension like before. Even if the contract had expired, it would just continue on a month-to-month basis until it was terminated. But now the delegation to the agent ends on the day that the contract expires. So they were very happy, Amanda, about the fact that I, gave them some breathing space to be able to continue their process of evaluating different strata management companies.
Yeah, really important to have a look at Section 50 when it comes to the term of appointment of strata managing agents. That's in our New South Wales Act. And you were just referring there, Reena, to subsection 4 and 6 about the extension of the term for periods of up to 3 months after expiry, and also subsection 6, where it says that the agent must give written notice of the end of a term at least 3 months before the end of that term, for the reasons that you've set out. Gosh, I've seen a few agency agreements that are coming up for expiry and the agent has not given that Section 50, subsection 6 notice. I'd say there's quite a few managers out there who are missing that one.
Yeah, and the other one too, Amanda, which I think may perhaps not be known by some strata committees, is that also subsection 5 says that, however, if a strata committee has extended a term of appointment of a strata managing agent under this section, so up to 3 months, the strata committee must give the strata managing agent at least 1 month's notice of a decision not to reappoint the strata managing agent or not to further extend the appointment. So it's a two-way street. So the committee also has an obligation. Well, I'm not really sure, Amanda, how they would know that obligation unless the strata managing agent told them that they have to do that. So,
and I'm not sure whether the template agreements that are floating around that are issued by the various industry bodies reflect these terms. I hope they do, because that's the first place that you go to when looking at, okay, our term is coming up. It's been 1 year or it's been 2 years or 3 years, whatever it is, and you look to the contract to see what each party's obligations are in terms of notice periods. I'd like to think that the standard form contracts are reflecting what is set out in Section 50.
I'm sure that they are, but I'm not sure whether or not the agents are exercising those functions as they need to under the Act.
So a good reminder there. I will put a link to Section 50 in the show notes for this episode, which you can access over at yourstrataproperty.com.au/podcasts. Transcript always available there too. Okay, well, for my win this week, I am bringing to the table a case, as I often like to do. Whenever we have decisions of our tribunal or our courts, I think that's a win, because that gives us some access to information, what's going on out there in this big wide world that is strata, what's happening in real buildings, in real life, and how is our legislation being applied. And by the time this episode goes to air, a number of you may have already read about this case. It's received some media. It is a case where a chairperson was awarded $120,000 in damages because of a defamatory email sent by a resident. Now, this is a district court case in New South Wales. The decision came out a few weeks ago in May, and it is called Raynor, Raynor, and Murray. And I will put a link to the reasons for decision in the show notes. It is a good 93-odd page decision that I was scrolling through recently. Lots and lots in there, but the short story is that a resident circulated an email addressed to the chairperson, but then copied to, I think, about 16 other owners. The terms of the email are set out in the judgment, but the resident was responding to requests that the chairperson had made to the resident to keep her letterbox locked because there had been some mail theft around the building, and the chair had received some advice from police that it is best that everybody keep their mailboxes locked. And there had been a series of prior emails between the chair and this particular resident about locking the mailbox. And for whatever reason, the resident wasn't too happy about being told what to do with her mailbox. Now, the interesting thing I find about this case is when you read the email that was sent by the resident, in my experience, having dealt with difficult people, difficult pieces of correspondence, the email's not all that bad.
Yeah, that's what I thought, Amanda. I mean, obviously, that case has received a lot of public attention, and we referenced it in our recent May newsletter. But when I read that email, I thought, I mean, I have got so much worse correspondence in our files. And our company also put out a newsletter some time ago about, be careful what you put in the records, because the records are a public source for owners to inspect and potential purchasers. So at the time we used it in a sense to warn people, like, be careful what you put in there, because it's not just between the managing agent and yourself, that owners have a right to access all the records, including emails. And that, as you said, Amanda, you've seen so many emails in your time. Sometimes there can be really, really terrible, and I would say defamatory things said about other people. I mean, I've had someone call someone a cockroach. I've had, it goes beyond just like really personal attacks. So, yeah, I think I definitely agree about what you just said about that, Amanda. I think it wasn't as bad.
Yeah, go and have a look at the case. The terms of the email in question are set out in full. And to just give you a little taster, the resident set out the history of communications that she had received from the chair about this issue, and said things like, rather than a simple knock on my door for a chat in person or to speak to me face to face, you've consistently chosen the public email option, copying in residents, alleging that you will hold us financially responsible for any mail theft. You've harassed me. Your emails are provoking. This is a consistent attempt to shame me about the letterbox issue. It's offensive, harassing and menacing, and please stop sending me these emails. So this was the email from the resident to the chair. That's the sort of the end of the email. It's worth reading the whole lot. As I said, that was copied into a number of other owners, and that was a key issue here. But the trial judge said these words: "It would be fair to say that every sentence of the defendant's email struck a blow at the plaintiff and was intended to ridicule and humiliate him in every way." Now, I read that in light of the email itself, and I'm not sure that I agree with that, but that's the decision in this particular case. And the award of $120,000 was made up of $90,000 in general damages and $30,000 in aggravated damages, because the trial judge found that the defendant had acted particularly badly in not apologising when asked by the chairperson's lawyers to apologise on a number of occasions, and by presenting their evidence in the case in such a way that it looked like the earlier emails from the chair had also been copied to a number of other owners, when in fact I think it came out in the evidence that the chair was only communicating direct to the resident about her letterbox and was not being public about that communication, as opposed to the tenant's email in reply. So the court found that was particularly bad behaviour, and so punished the resident for that with an additional $30,000 award. But definitely anybody who is sending emails as a resident or as a committee member, a strata manager, have a read of this case. I wonder whether it's a one-off, but it's definitely worth being across those issues.
I think that's a really good point, Amanda, that people need to think about what they're writing when they actually do put fingers to keyboards. And what will happen if the resident, Amanda, can't pay that money? Like, what happens then? I sort of thought about that at the time, thinking, well, that's a lot of money. So what would happen if she couldn't pay the money? Yeah,
well, the usual enforcement procedures would apply, where there is a judgment debt. If she has assets that can be sold to meet the debt, that may have to happen.
But if she doesn't have any assets, Amanda, that would equate to that sort of sum. Would that be like one of those things where you got to pay it back for the rest of your life or something like that?
Yeah, she might declare bankruptcy if they pursue it that far. She may be able to enter into an instalment arrangement where she can pay that by instalments. She may appeal. This is still only a few weeks out, so I don't know the parties to this case or the lawyers who are acting, so I don't know what the word on the street is about an appeal, but it's interesting. It works through the defences that the resident raised, particularly in relation to truth and to qualified privilege and to triviality. None of those defences were successful in getting the defendant off in this case. So check that one out.
Yeah, definitely, Amanda. Yeah, I think the lesson to be learned is that be aware of what you write. I think that's pretty much the key takeaway is just be careful. It's because, you're writing an email doesn't mean that it may not end up in the hands of someone who just might take umbrance and take them out of much further than you could imagine.
Yeah, indeed. I always find responding to difficult emails, a good rule of thumb is to take a breath and if you can, even wait 24 hours.
Yeah. Or another thing, Amanda, is to actually just do a draft and just send it to yourself and then wait another 24 hours. And then usually you have to do a severe edit of that original toning down, softening, Or
you read it in the calm light of the next day or the next couple of hours and you realise, actually, I don't need to say all of that.
Yeah, exactly. Cull.
And as lawyers, we're constantly reading correspondence through the eyes of a judge or the tribunal member. Or what would this look like if it was attached to an affidavit? That's almost, it becomes this ingrained approach in a lawyer's brain, and it's a good one if you can establish it, always looking at your own correspondence with critical eyes. What would a third party who was judging my behaviour in this situation?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, my husband, who's a lawyer, has always trained me to write everything that I've ever written, that what would a third party ever say if it ended up in a situation where someone else had to look at that and make a decision based on what you've written? That's why I'm surprised, Amanda, when I receive records from other agents that there's a lot of banter, chit-chatter between even lawyers and their clients, and I'm thinking, this is formal correspondence and I've actually got a copy of it. I'm thinking, why do you write like this? And, I'm thinking to myself, that's something that perhaps, people would do, off air, but not when they're talking about a client. They're sort of muddling this sort of familiarity with, formal correspondence. And I always think to myself, to me, it's like when you're a strata manager, you need to be professional. And any personal relationship you may have with people that you're working with need to be, I think, excised from email communication.
Yep, that is a very good reminder to all of us to remain professional. Okay, I think that about wraps up this week, Reena. Anything else?
No, all good, Amanda.
I will catch you next time.
See you then. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Your Strata Property, the podcast which consistently delivers to property owners reliable and accurate information about their strata property. You can access all the information below this episode via the show notes at www.yourstrataproperty.com.au. You can also ask questions in the comments section, which Amanda will answer in her upcoming episodes. How can Amanda help you today?